In the annals of human history, there is a deep-seated amnesia that has persisted for over 3 millennia. It is a well-known fact that in times of severe trauma, the human mind may utilize forgetfulness as a coping mechanism. On a global level, the same principle is at work. Sometime around the first millennia BC, the Earth and all its inhabitants were rocked by a global upheaval. During this period, civilizations fell, animals were obliterated, and populations were decimated. The years and seasons were altered, and record-keeping came to a halt. The destructive forces that ravaged the land and skies were not lost to the survivors. Rather, they were etched into rock art all over the world and echoed through the myths and legends of global cultures. Today, the world is in a state of denial, with many people believing that the past was as placid as our present. But the truth is that the history of humanity is punctuated by great upheavals of nature, and every animal on Earth participated in these frightening events. This is the story of those cataclysms and how they tie together the great mysteries we see today. Why did ancient civilizations crumble? What caused the mass extinction of animal populations? What causes what we term the Ice Age? What causes mountain building? How did marine fossils end up on the highest peaks of the world? What causes deserts? How are fossils created in coal and oil? Why do we find remnants of cultures buried under the sea? Why do so many ancient cultural legends, narrations, and folklore share similar ideas and themes? At various points in the history of humanity, the Earth and all its inhabitants witnessed a terrifying sight in the skies. A comet, or some large body with a reddish hue, passed close to the Earth. During this time, electrical discharges took place, and thunderous shrieks of sound were heard all over the world, and the witnesses to these events would etch them into rock. Eventually, the red object would eclipse the sun, and the dust tail would waft into the Earth. Meteorites, stones, red dust would pelt the lands. Volcanoes would erupt, hurricanes would sweep the lands, earthquakes would shake the globe. This was then quickly followed by a movement of the land. The continents of the Earth slid to new locations, causing ocean water to rush inland. The previous poles would move out of the polar circle and into warmer latitudes, while previously temperate geographical locations moved into the polar regions, instantly preserving the animal life. Great floods inundated the lands, and in its retreat, leaving heaps of ocean sediment mixed with splintered marine life, land animals, rocks, debris, trees, and the like. The heat developed from the rapidly moving crust would cause some rivers to boil, and in other places, rocks in the mountain zones would melt. Rock would be thrust up, creating new mountain zones. Some rock would be thrust up and move over older rock. The rotation of the Earth, and therefore the moon, would have been disturbed, changing the length of the years and months. The iron oxide from the tail of the large cometary body, entering the Earth and coming into contact with the superheated air in places due to all the volcanic activity, would ignite and rain down fire. Where there existed cracks in the ground, it would gather into the ground and form oil. It would pollute the rivers and lakes, causing fish to die, and humans who tried to drink from it to vomit. Land that was once along the shorelines in some places would be inundated, while land that was previously under the ocean would become the new shorelines. Some islands would disappear, while some new ones would be created. It was a time of great upheaval. The ice buildup from the previous poles, having been moved to a warmer location, would eventually melt, causing the ocean levels to rise. As new poles are formed, the ocean levels dropped. The ice caps of the poles never stretched down to places along the equator, like Madagascar, but instead, these were once the poles. What we see as being previously covered in ice today was simply a polar region at one point. During these paroxysms of nature, some animals are completely decimated, while others survived. Humanity and animals alike took refuge in caves. These terrifying natural events were seen to some as being conflagrations caused by the gods, and legends, folklore, and myths sprung up around the angry battles in the skies. But this is in fact a naturally explained occurrence, but was little understood by ancient man. Mankind is in a state of collective amnesia from these global, cataclysmic events. We want to see the past as uneventful, and since the mid-1800s, geology and archaeology insists on interpreting the Earth's history in this light. Relegating any competing interpretation is fringe, fantasy, or myth. And yet, if our ancestors did bear witness to these great cataclysmic upheavals, then we should find these in shared tales around the globe, the evidence carved upon the Earth. We now start with this assumption. Prior to the last series of cataclysms, when, as we assume, the globe spun on an axis pointed in a different direction in space, with its poles at a different location, on a different orbit, the year could not have been the same as it has been since. Numerous evidence is preserved which prove that prior to the year of 365 and a quarter day, the year was only 360 days long. Some cultures seem to have spent years with the old calendrical system, then adding 5 days extra, while others held on to the 360-day system for much longer. The addition of 5 extra days was often viewed as the days of destruction, or the days that do not belong. The texts of the Veda period know a year of only 360 days. This Hindu year of 360 days is divided into 12 months of 30 days each. The texts describe the moon as crescent for 15 days, and waning for another 15 days. They also say that the sun moved for 6 months, or 180 days to the north, and for the same number of days to the south. A month of 30 days and a year of 360 days formed the basis of early Hindu chronology. The Old Babylonian year was also composed of 360 days. That the ancient Babylonian year had this many days was known before the cuneiform script was deciphered. Ctesias wrote that the walls of Babylon were 360 furlongs in compass, as many as there had been days in the year. The Egyptian year, too, was composed of the same number of days before it became 365. The calendar of the Ipuwer Papyrus, a document of the New Kingdom, has a year of 12 months of 30 days each. In 1866, a tablet in the Delta was discovered that relayed when, in the 9th year of King Ptolemy in 238 BC, a reform party among the Egyptian priests met at Canopus and drew up a decree. The purpose of the decree was to harmonize the calendar with the seasons according to the present arrangement of the world. In the 5th century, Herodotus wrote, "The Egyptians, reckoning 30 days to each of the 12 months, add 5 days in every year over and above the number, and so the completed circle of seasons is made to agree with the calendar." That the introduction of additional days in the calendar year was not the result of progress in astronomical knowledge, but was caused by an actual change in the planetary movements, is implied in the Canopus decree, for it refers to the amendment of the faults of the heaven. In his Isis and Osiris, Plutarch describes by means of an allegory the change in the length of the year. Hermes playing at draughts with the moon won from her the 70th part of each of her periods of illumination, and from all the winnings he composed 5 days, and added them as an addition to the 360 days. Plutarch informs us also that one of these additional days was regarded as inauspicious. No business was transacted on that day, and even kings would not attend to their bodies until nightfall. Cleobulus, who was counted among the 7 sages of ancient Greece, in his famous allegory, represents the year as divided into 12 months of 30 days. The father is 1, the sons are 12, and each of them has 30 daughters. The ancient Romans also reckoned 360 days to the year. The calendar of the peoples of China, too, had the same number of days in a year, and each month consisted of 30 days each. In ancient South America, the year also consisted of 360 days, and the Mayan year consisted of the same, and sometime later 5 days were added, and the year was then a ton, a 360-day period, and 5 days. Every 4th year another day was added to the year. They did reckon them apart, and called them the days of nothing. Friar Diego de Landa, in his Yucatan Before and After the Conquest, wrote, "They had their perfect year like ours, of 365 days and 6 hours, which they divided into months in 2 ways. In the first, the months were of 30 days and were called Yu, which signifies the moon, and they counted from the rising of the new moon until it disappeared. Delanda also wrote that the 5 supplementary days were regarded as sinister and unlucky. They were called days without name. All over the world we find that there was at some time the same calendar of 360 days, and that at some later date, about the 7th century before the present era, 5 days were added at the end of the year as days over the year, or days of nothing. Scholars who investigated the calendars of the Incas of Peru and the Mayas of Yucatan wondered at the calendar of 360 days. So did the scholars who studied the calendars of the Egyptians, Persians, Hindus, Chaldeans, Assyrians, Hebrews, Chinese, Greeks, or Romans. Most of them, while debating the problem in their own field, did not suspect that the same problem turned up in the calendar of every nation of antiquity. The reason for the universal identity of time reckoning between the 15th and the 8th centuries lay in the actual movement of the Earth on its axis and along its orbit, and in the revolution of the moon during that historical period. The length of a lunar revolution must have been almost exactly 30 days, and the length of the year apparently did not vary from 360 days by more than a few hours. Then a series of catastrophes occurred that changed the axis and the orbit of the Earth and the orbit of the moon, and the ancient year, after going through a period marked by disarranged seasons, settled into a slow-moving year of 365 days. As a result of repeated unrests, the Earth changed from an orbit of 360 days duration to one of 365 and a quarter day, the days probably not being exactly equal in both cases. The month changed from 30 to 29 and a half days. These were the values at the beginning and at the end of the century of the Battle of the Gods. Neither the calendar, nor the celestial charts, nor the sundials, nor the water clocks of the time before 687 BC were adequate for their purpose after that year. Values subsequently established in different parts of the terrestrial globe have remained practically unchanged down to the present, save for very small improvements resulting from the more precise calculations of modern times. This stability of the calendar is because the celestial order has remained unaltered. No changes in the heavenly order were observed except for minor perturbations between the planets which have no visible effect on their motion. Thus, we are comforted by the belief, which is wishful thinking, that we live in an orderly universe. The order today is not the primeval order. It was established less than 27 centuries ago. An entire year after the eruption of Krakatoa in the East Indies in 1833, sunset and sunrise in both hemispheres were very colorful. Lava dust suspended in the air and carried around the globe accounted for this phenomenon. In 1783, after the eruption of a volcano in Iceland, the world was darkened for months. Records of this phenomenon are found in many contemporary authors. One German contemporary compared the gloomy world of the year 1783 with the Egyptian plague of darkness. The world, too, was gloomy in the year of Caesar's death, in the year 44 BC. There was almost a whole year of continuous gloom, wrote Pliny. Virgil described this year in these words: "The sun veiled his shining face in dusky gloom, and godless age feared everlasting night. Germany heard the clash of arms through all the sky. The Alps rocked with unwonted terrors, and specters, pale in wondrous wise, were seen at evening twilight." On September 23, 44 BC, a short while after the death of Caesar, a comet became visible at daytime that was extremely bright and moved from north to west. It was seen for only a few days and vanished while still in the north. It appears that the gloom which enveloped the world the year after Caesar's death was caused by the dust of the comet, dispersed in the atmosphere. If the eruption of a single volcano can darken the atmosphere over the entire globe, a simultaneous and prolonged eruption of thousands of volcanoes would blacken the sky. And if the dust of the comet of 44 BC had a darkening effect, contact of the Earth with a great cinder-trailing comet of the 15th century before this era could likewise cause the blackening of the sky. As this comet activated all the volcanoes and created new ones, the cumulative action of the eruptions and of the comet's dust must have saturated the atmosphere with floating particles. Volcanoes vomit water vapor as well as cinders. The heating effect of the contact of the globe with the comet must have caused a great evaporation from the surface of the seas and rivers. Two kinds of clouds, water vapor and dust, were formed. The clouds obscured the sky, and drifting very low, hung as a fog. The veil left by the gaseous trail of the hostile star and the smoke of the volcanoes caused darkness, not complete but profound. This condition prevailed for decades, and only very gradually did the dust subside and the water vapors condense. A vast night reigned over all the American land, of which tradition speaks unanimously. Gamarra, the Spaniard who came to the Western Hemisphere in the middle of the 16th century, shortly after the conquest, wrote, "After the destruction of the fourth sun, the world plunged into darkness during the space of 25 years. Amid this profound obscurity, 10 years before the appearance of the fifth sun, mankind was regenerated. In the years of this gloom, when the world was covered with clouds and shrouded in mist, the Quiche tribe migrated to Mexico, crossing a sea enveloped in a somber fog. In the manuscript Quiche, it is also narrated that there was little light on the surface of the earth. The faces of the sun and of the moon were covered with clouds." The Hermitage Papyrus in Leningrad says of a time when there are lamentations about a terrible catastrophe, when heaven and earth turned upside down. After this catastrophe, darkness covered the earth. The sun is veiled and shines not in the sight of men. None can live when the sun is veiled by clouds. None knoweth that midday is there. The shadow is not discerned. Not dazzled is the sight when the sun is beheld. He is in the sky like the moon. In this description, the light of the sun is compared to the light of the moon. But even in the light of the moon, objects cast a shadow. If the midday could not be discerned, the disk of the sun was not clearly visible, and only its diffused light made the day different from the night. The gloom gradually lifted with the passing years as the clouds became less thick. Little by little, the sky and the sun appeared less and less veiled. Nihongi, a chronicle of Japan from the earliest period, refers to a time when there was continuous darkness and no difference of day and night. It describes in the name of the emperor Kami Yamato an ancient time when the world was given over to widespread desolation. It was an age of darkness and disorder. The name Shadow of Death expresses the influence of the sunless gloom upon the life processes. The Chinese annals of Wang Shixing, in the chapter dealing with the 10 stems, the 10 stages of the Earth's primeval history, relate that at Wu, the 6th stem, darkness destroys the growth of all things. Buddhist scholars declare that with the beginning of the 6th world age, or sun, the whole world becomes filled with smoke and saturated with greasiness of that smoke. There is no distinction of day and night, and the gloom is caused by a cycle-destroying great cloud of cosmic origin and dimensions. On the Samoan Islands, the Aborigines narrate, "Then arose smell, the smell became smoke, which again became clouds. The sea too arose, and in a stupendous catastrophe of nature, the land sank into the sea. The new earth, the Samoan Islands, arose out of the womb of the last earth. In the darkness that enveloped the world, the islands of Tonga, Samoa, and Fiji rose from the bottom of the ocean." Ancient rhymes of the inhabitants of Hawaii refer to a prolonged darkness. "The earth is dancing, let darkness cease. The heavens are enclosing. Finished is the world of Hawaii." The Quiche tribe migrated to Mexico. The Israelites roamed in the desert. The Amalekites migrated toward Palestine and Egypt. An uneasy movement took place in all corners of the ruined world. The migration in central Polynesia, shrouded in gloom, is narrated in the traditions of the Aborigines of this part of the world about a chief named Te Erui, who lived long in utter darkness, who migrated in a canoe named Weary of Darkness to find a land of light, and who, after many years of wandering, saw the sky clearing little by little and arrived at a region where they could see each other clearly. In the Kalevala, the Finnish epos, which dates to an enormous antiquity, the time when the sun and moon disappeared from the sky and dreaded shadows covered it, is described in these words. "Even birds grew sick and perished. Men and maidens, faint and famished, perished in the cold and darkness, from the absence of the sunshine, from the absence of the moonlight. But the wise men of the Northland could not know the dawn of morning, for the moon shines not in season, nor appears the sun at midday, from their stations in the sky vault. Vegetation died in the catastrophe. The Iranian book of Bundahiz says, "Blight was diffused over the vegetation, and it withered away immediately. When the sky was shattered, the day became dark, and the earth teemed with noxious creatures. For a long time there was no green thing seen. Seeds would not germinate in a sunless world. It took many years before the earth again brought forth vegetation. This is told in the written and oral traditions of many peoples. The regeneration of the world and of humankind took place under the veil of the gloomy shadows, and the time is indicated as the end of the 15th year of the darkness, 10 years before the end of the gloom." The eerie world, dark and groaning, was unpleasant to all the senses, except the sense of smell. The world was fragrant. When the breeze blew, the clouds conveyed a sweet odor. In the Papyrus Anastasi, written in the year of misery, in which it is said that the months are reversed, the planet god is described as arriving with the sweet wind before him. In a similar text of the Hebrews, we read that the times and seasons were confused, and a fragrance perfumed all the world, and the perfume was brought by the pillar of smoke. The fragrance was like that of myrrh and frankincense. Israel was surrounded by clouds, and as soon as the clouds were set in motion, the winds breathed myrrh and frankincense. The Vedas contain hymns to Agni which glows from the sky, saying, "Its fragrance became the fragrance of the earth." In what way did this veil of gloom dissolve itself? When the air is overcharged with vapor, dew, rain, hail, or snowfalls. Most probably the atmosphere discharged its compounds, the mixtures of dust that hung in the skies, presumably of carbon and hydrogen, in a similar way. Has any testimony been preserved that during the many years of gloom carbohydrates precipitated? When the dew fell upon the camp in the night, the manna fell upon it. It was like the hoar frost on the ground. It had the shape of coriander seed, the yellowish color of bdellium, and an oily taste like honeycomb. It was called corn of heaven, and it was ground between stones and baked in pans. The manna fell from the clouds. After the nightly cooling, the carbohydrates precipitated and fell with the morning dew. The grains dissolved in the heat and evaporated, but in a closed vessel the substance could be preserved for a long time. The ancient texts endeavored to explain the phenomenon of manna, but why should this seed be called corn of heaven, bread of heaven? Or why should it be said it will rain bread from heaven? In the Talmud, it is also said that the clouds brought the heavenly bread. But if manna fell from the clouds that enveloped the entire world, it must have fallen not only in the desert of wanderings, but everywhere. And not only the Israelites, but other peoples too must have tasted it and spoken of it in their traditions. There was a world fire, says the Icelandic tradition, followed by the Fimbul winter, and only one human pair remained alive in the north. This human pair lie hidden in the holt during the fire of Surt. Then came the terrible Fimbul winter at the end of the world age. Meanwhile they feed on morning dew, and from them come the folk who people the renewed earth. 3 elements are connected in the Icelandic tradition, which are the same 3 we met in the Israelite tradition: the world fire, the dark winter that endured many years, and the morning dew that served as food during these years of gloom when nothing budded. The Maori of New Zealand tell of fiery winds and fierce clouds that lashed the waters into tidal waves that touched the sky and were accompanied by furious hailstorms. The ocean fled. The offspring of the storm and hail were mist and heavy dew and light dew. Then clear light increased in the world, and the beings who had been hidden between the sky and earth before they were parted now multiplied upon the earth. This tradition of the Maori has substantially the same elements as the Israelite tradition. The destruction of the world was accompanied by hurricanes, hail, meteorites, and sky-high billows. The land submerged. A mist covered the earth for a long time. Heavy dew fell to the ground together with light dew. The writings of Buddhism relate that when a world cycle comes to an end with the world destroyed and the ocean dried up, there is no distinction of day and night, and heavenly ambrosia serves as food. In the hymns of Rigveda, it is said that honey or madhu comes from the clouds. Among the hymns of the Atharva Veda, one says, "From heaven, from earth, from the atmosphere, from the sea, from the fire, and from the wind, the honey lash hath verily sprung. This, clothed in ambrosia, all the creatures revering, acclaim in their hearts." The Egyptian Book of the Dead speaks of the divine clouds and the great dew that bring the earth into contact with the heavens. The Greeks called the heavenly bread ambrosia. It is described by the Greek poets in identical terms with manna. It had the taste of honey and a fragrance. Greek authors from Homer and Hesiod down through the ages continually referred to ambrosia as the heavenly food, which in its fluid state is called nectar. The belief of Aristotle and other writers that honey falls from the atmosphere with the dew was based on the experience of those days when the world was veiled in the carbon clouds that precipitated honey frost. These clouds are described as dreaded shades in the Kalevala. From these dreaded shades, says the Epos, honey dropped. And the clouds their fragrance sifted honey from their home within the heavens. The Maori in the Pacific, the Jewish peoples on the border of Asia and Africa, the Hindus, the Finns, the Icelanders, all describe the honey food being dropped from the clouds, dreary shades of the shadow of death that enveloped the earth after a cosmic catastrophe. All traditions agree also that the source of the heavenly bread falling from the clouds with the morning dew was a celestial body. The ancient oracles of Greece said that the sweet heavenly bread came from the starry heavens. The planet god Ukko is said to have been the source of the honey that dropped from the clouds. Athena covered other planet goddesses with a robe ambrosial and provided nectar and ambrosia to the heroes. Other traditions too see the origin of the honeydew in a celestial body that enveloped the earth in clouds. For this reason, ambrosia or manna is called heavenly bread. A few hours after the break of day, the heat under the cloud cover liquefied the grains and volatilized them. The ground absorbed some of the liquefied mass, as it absorbs dew. The grains also fell upon the water, and the rivers became milky in appearance. The Egyptians relate that the Nile flowed for a time blended with honey. The strange appearance of the rivers of Palestine caused the scouts who returned from a survey of the land to call it the land that floweth with milk and honey. The heavens rain oil, the wadis run with honey, says a text found in Ras Shamra in Syria. In the rabbinical literature, it is said that melting of manna formed streams that furnished drink to many deer and other animals. The Atharva Veda hymns say that honey lash came down from fire and wind, ambrosia fell, and streams of honey flowed upon the earth. The broad earth shall milk for us precious honey, shall pour out milk for us in rich streams. The Finnish tradition narrates that land and water were covered successively by black, red, and white milk. A memory of a time when streams of milk and streams of sweet nectar flowed is also preserved in Ovid. Sometime before 1000 BC, a celestial body came very close to the earth. The account of this catastrophe is found in a large number of cultural documents and narratives. The object was on its way from its perihelion, or the point in orbit where it's closest to the sun. The large gaseous and debris-filled tail touched the earth first. One of the first visible signs of this encounter was the reddening of the earth's surface by a fine dust of rusty pigment. In sea, lake, and river, this pigment gave a bloody coloring to the water. Because these particles contained iron and other soluble pigments, the world turned red. The manuscript Quiche of the Mayas tells that in the Western Hemisphere, in the days of a great cataclysm, when the earth quaked and the sun's motion was interrupted, the water in the rivers turned to blood. Ipuwer, the Egyptian eyewitness of the catastrophe, wrote his lament on papyrus. The river is blood. And this corresponds with the book of Exodus. All the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. The author of the papyrus also wrote, plague is throughout the land. Blood is everywhere. And this too corresponds with the book of Exodus. There was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. The presence of the red pigment in the rivers caused the death of fish, followed by decomposition and smell. And the river stank, and all the Egyptians digged round about the river for water to drink, for they could not drink of the water of the river. The papyrus relates, men shrink from tasting, human beings thirst after water. And that is our water. That is our happiness. What shall we do in respect thereof? All is ruin. The skin of men and of animals were irritated by the dust, which caused boils, sickness, and the death of cattle. Wild animals, frightened by the portents in the sky, came close to the villages and cities. The mythology which personified the forces of the cosmic drama described the world as colored red. In one Egyptian myth, the bloody hue of the world is ascribed to the blood of Osiris, the mortally wounded planet god. In another myth, it is the blood of Seth. In the Babylonian myth, the world was colored red by the blood of the slain Tiamat, the heavenly monster. The Finnish epos of Kalevala describes how, in the days of the cosmic upheaval, the world was sprinkled with red milk. The Altai Tatars tell of a catastrophe when blood turns the whole world red, and a world conflagration follows. The Orphic hymns refer to the time when the heavenly vault, mighty Olympus, trembled fearfully, and the earth around shrieked fearfully, and the sea was stirred, troubled with its purple waves. An old subject for debate is, why is the Red Sea so named? If a sea is called black or white, that may be due to the dark coloring of the water or to the brightness of the ice and snow. The Red Sea has a deep blue color. As no better reason was found, a few coral formations or some red birds on its shores were proposed as explanations of its name. Like all the water in Egypt, the water on the surface of the Sea of the Passage was of a red tint. It appears that Raphael was not mistaken when, in painting the scene of the passage, he colored the water red. It was, of course, not this mountain or that river or that sea exclusively that was reddened, thus earning the name red or bloody, as distinguished from other mountains and seas. But crowds of people, wherever they were, who witnessed the cosmic upheaval and escaped with their lives, ascribed the name Hemus or red to particular places. The Earth entered deeper into the tail of the onrushing comet and approached its body. This approach, if one is to believe the sources, was followed by a disturbance in the rotation of the Earth. Terrific hurricanes swept the Earth because of the change or reversal of the angular velocity of rotation, and because of the sweeping gases, dust, and cinders of the comet. Numerous rabbinical sources describe the calamity of darkness. An exceedingly strong wind endured 7 days. All the time the land was shrouded in darkness. On the 4th, 5th, and 6th days, the darkness was so dense that the people of Egypt could not stir from their place. The darkness was of such a nature that it could not be dispelled by artificial means. The light of the fire was either extinguished by the violence of storm, or else it was made invisible and swallowed up in the density of the darkness. Nothing could be discerned. None was able to speak or to hear, nor could anyone venture to take food, but they lay themselves down their outward senses in a trance. Thus they remained, overwhelmed by the affliction. A shrine of black granite found at El Arish on the border of Egypt and Palestine bears a long inscription in hieroglyphics. It reads, "The land was in great affliction. Evil fell on this earth. There was a great upheaval in the residence. Nobody could leave the palace during 9 days, and during these 9 days of upheaval, there was such a tempest that neither men nor gods, the royal family, could see the faces of those beside them. If the Egyptian darkness was caused by the Earth's stasis or tilting of its axis and was aggravated by a thin cinder dust from the comet, then the entire globe must have suffered from the effect of these two concurring phenomena. In either the eastern or the western parts of the world there must have been a very extended, gloomy day. Nations and tribes in many places of the globe, to the south, to the north, and to the west of Egypt, have old traditions about a cosmic catastrophe during which the sun did not shine, but in some parts of the world the traditions maintain that the sun did not set for a period, equal to a few days. Tribes of the Sudan to the south of Egypt refer in their tales to a time when the night would not come to an end. Kalevala, the epos of the Finns, tells of a time when hailstones of iron fell from the sky, and the sun and the moon disappeared from the sky and did not appear again. In their stead, after a period of darkness, a new sun and a new moon were placed in the sky. Caius Julius Solinus writes that, following the deluge which is reported to have occurred in the days of Ogyges, a heavy night spread over the globe. In the manuscripts of Avila and Molina, who collected the traditions of the Indians of the New World, it is related that the sun did not appear for 5 days. A cosmic collision of stars preceded the cataclysm. People and animals tried to escape to mountain caves. Scarcely had they reached there when the sea, breaking out of bounds following a terrifying shock, began to rise on the Pacific coast. But as the sea rose, filling the valleys and the plains around, the mountains rose too, like a ship on the waves. During the 5 days that this cataclysm lasted, the sun did not show its face, and the earth remained in darkness. Thus, the traditions of the Peruvians describe a time when the sun did not appear for 5 days. In the upheaval, the earth changed its profile, and the sea fell upon the land. East of Egypt, in Babylonia, the 11th tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh refers to the same events. From out the horizon rose a dark cloud, and it rushed against the earth. The land was shriveled by the heat of the flames. Desolation stretched to heaven. All that was bright was turned into darkness, nor could a brother distinguish his brother. 6 days the hurricane, deluge, and tempest continued sweeping the land, and all human back to its clay was returned. The Anugita reveals that a 3-fold day and a 3-fold night concluded a world age, and the Book of the Bundahis tells of the world being dark at midday, as though it were in deepest night. It was caused, according to the Bundahis, by a war between the stars and the planets. A protracted night, deepened by the onrushing dust sweeping in from interplanetary space, enveloped Europe, Africa, and America, the valleys of the Euphrates, and the Indus also. If the Earth did not stop rotating but slowed down or was tilted, there must have been a longitude where a prolonged day was followed by a prolonged night. In China, during the reign of the Emperor Yahu, a great catastrophe brought a world age to a close. For 10 days the sun did not set. The Earth, forced out of its regular motion, reacted to the close approach of the body of the comet. A major shock convulsed the lithosphere, and the area of the earthquake was the entire globe. The author of the Ipuwer Papyrus witnessed and survived this earthquake. The towns are destroyed. Upper Egypt has become waste. All is ruin. The residence is overturned in a minute. Only an earthquake could have overturned the residence in a minute. An earthquake caused by contact or collision with a comet must be felt simultaneously all around the world. An earthquake is a phenomenon that occurs from time to time, but an earthquake accompanying an impact in the cosmos would stand out and be recalled as a memorable date by survivors. The swift shifting of the atmosphere under the impact of the gaseous parts of the comet, the drift of air attracted by the body of the comet, and the rush of the atmosphere resulting from inertia when the Earth stopped rotating or shifted its poles, all contributed to produce hurricanes of enormous velocity and force and of worldwide dimensions. Manuscript Troano and other documents of the Mayas describe a cosmic catastrophe during which the ocean fell on the continent, and a terrible hurricane swept the earth. The hurricane broke up and carried away all towns and all forests. Exploding volcanoes, tides sweeping over mountains, and impetuous winds threatened to annihilate humankind, and actually did annihilate many species of animals. The face of the earth changed, mountains collapsed, other mountains grew and rose over the onrushing cataract of water driven from oceanic spaces. Numberless rivers lost their beds, and a wild tornado moved through the debris descending from the sky. The end of the world age was caused by huracan, the physical agent that brought darkness and swept away houses and trees and even rocks and mounds of earth. From this name is derived hurricane. The theme of a cosmic hurricane is reiterated time and again in the Hindu Vedas and in the Persian Avesta, and diluvium venti, the deluge of wind, is a term known from many ancient authors. The Epic of Gilgamesh, which says that 6 days and a night, the hurricane, deluge, and tempest continued sweeping the land, and mankind perished almost altogether. In the battle of the planet god Marduk with Tiamat, he, Marduk, created the evil wind, and the tempest, and the hurricane, and the fourfold wind, and the sevenfold wind, and the whirlwind, and the wind which had no equal. The Maoris narrate that amid a stupendous catastrophe, the mighty winds, the fierce squalls, the clouds, dense, dark, fiery, wildly drifting, wildly bursting, rushed on creation. In their midst, Tauhira Matea, father of winds and storms, and swept away giant forests, and lashed the waters into billows whose crests rose high like mountains. The earth groaned terribly, and the ocean fled. In the Japanese cosmogonical myth, the sun goddess hid herself for a long time in a heavenly cave in fear of the storm god. The source of light disappeared, the whole world became dark, and the storm god caused monstrous destruction. Gods made terrible noise so that the sun should reappear, and from their tumult, the earth quaked. In Japan and in the vast extent of the ocean, hurricanes and earthquakes are not rare occurrences, but they do not disturb the day and night succession, nor is there any resulting permanent change in the sky and its luminaries. The sky was low, relate the Polynesians of Takaiofo Island, and then the winds and waterspouts and the hurricanes came and carried up the sky to its present height. When a world cycle is destroyed by wind, says the Buddhist text on the world cycles, the wind also turns the ground upside down and throws it into the sky, and areas of 100 leagues in extent, 200, 300, 500 leagues in extent, crack and are thrown upward by the force of the wind, and do not fall again but are blown to powder in the sky and annihilated. And the wind throws up also into the sky the mountains which encircle the earth. They are ground to powder and destroyed. The cosmic wind blows and destroys 100,000 times 10 million worlds. The ocean tides are produced by the action of the sun, and to a larger extent by that of the moon. A body larger than the moon or one nearer to the earth would act with greater effect. A comet with a head as large as the earth, passing sufficiently close, would raise the waters of the oceans miles high. The slowing down or stasis of the earth in its rotation would cause a tidal recession of water toward the poles, but the celestial body nearby would disturb this poleward recession, drawing the water toward itself. The traditions of many peoples persist that seas were torn apart, and their water heaped high and thrown upon the continents. In order to establish that these traditions refer to one and the same event, or at least to an event of the same order, we must keep to this guiding sequence. The great tide followed a disturbance in the motion of the earth. The Chinese annals say that in the time of Emperor Yahu, the sun did not go down for 10 days. The world was in flames, and in their vast extent, the waters overtopped the great heights, threatening the heavens with their floods. The water of the ocean was heaped up and cast upon the continent of Asia. A great tidal wave swept over the mountains and broke in the middle of the Chinese Empire. The water was caught in the valleys between the mountains, and the land was flooded for decades. The traditions of the people of Peru tell that for a period of time equal to 5 days and 5 nights, the sun was not in the sky, and then the ocean left the shore and with a terrible din broke over the continent. The entire surface of the earth was changed in this catastrophe. The Choctaw Indians of Oklahoma relate, the earth was plunged in darkness for a long time. Finally, a bright light appeared in the north, but it was mountain-high waves, rapidly coming nearer. In these traditions, there are 2 concurrent elements, a complete darkness that endured a number of days, and when the light broke through, a mountain-high wave that brought destruction. When the Spaniards conquered Yucatan, Indians versed in their ancient literature related to the conquerors the tradition handed down to them by their ancestors. Their forefathers were delivered from pursuit by some other people when the Lord opened for them a way in the midst of the sea. According to the Lapland epic, the world was overwhelmed by the hurricane and the sea, and almost all human beings perished. After the seawall fell on the continent, gigantic waves continued to roll, and dead bodies were dashed about in dark waters. The great earthquake and the chasms that opened in the ground, the appearance of a celestial body with serpent-like flashes, rivers flowing upward, a seawall that crushed everything, mountains that became leveled or covered with water, the world that was turned over and then righted, the sun that no more shone in the sky. At the same time that the seas were heaped up in immense tides, a spectacle went on in the sky which presented itself to the horrified onlookers on earth as a gigantic battle. Because this battle was seen from almost all parts of the world, and because it impressed itself very strongly upon the imagination of the peoples, it can be reconstructed in some detail. When the Earth passed through the gases, dust, and meteorites of the tail of the comet, disturbed in rotation, it proceeded on a distorted orbit. Emerging from the darkness, the eastern hemisphere faced the head of the comet. This head only shortly before had passed close to the sun and was in a state of candescence. The night the great earthquake shook the globe was, according to rabbinical literature, as bright as the day of the summer solstice. Because of the proximity of the Earth, the comet left its own orbit and for a while followed the orbit of the Earth. The great ball of the comet retreated, then again approached the Earth, shrouded in a dark column of gases which looked like a pillar of smoke during the day and of fire at night, and the Earth once more passed through the atmosphere of the comet, this time at its neck. This stage was accompanied by violent and incessant electrical discharges between the atmosphere of the tail and the terrestrial atmosphere. There was an interval of about 6 days between these two close approaches. Emerging from the gases of the comet, the Earth seems to have changed the direction of its rotation, and the pillar of smoke moved to the opposite horizon. The column looked like a gigantic moving serpent. When the tidal waves rose to their highest point and the seas were torn apart, a tremendous spark flew between the Earth and the globe of the comet, which instantly pushed down the miles-high billows. Meanwhile, the tail of the comet and its head, having become entangled with each other by their close contact with the Earth, exchanged violent discharges of electricity. It looked like a battle between the brilliant globe and the dark column of smoke. In the exchange of electrical potentials, the tail and the head were attracted one to the other and repelled one from the other. From the serpent-like tail extensions grew, and it lost the form of a column. It looked now like a furious animal with legs and with many heads. The discharges tore the column to pieces, a process that was accompanied by a rain of meteorites upon the Earth. It appeared as though the monster were defeated by the brilliant globe and buried in the sea, or wherever the meteorites fell. The events in the sky were viewed by the peoples of the world as a fight between an evil monster in the form of a serpent and the light god who engaged the monster in battle and thus saved the world. If the shared folklore is to be believed, then we must see the remnants of these catastrophes today. In Alaska, to the north of Mount McKinley, the tallest mountain in North America, the valleys of muck are a frozen wasteland of preserved animals and trees. Miners searching for gold in these muck beds use giant hydraulic machines to dig down into the frozen ground, which was found to contain an enormous number of icy bones of extinct animals such as mammoths, mastodon, superbison, and horse, with portions of ligaments, skin hair, and flesh still intact. Mixed with the animals are enormous amounts of torn and twisted trees, piled in splintered masses. Under what conditions did this great slaughter take place, in which millions upon millions of animals were torn limb from limb and mingled with uprooted trees? The Arctic coast of Siberia is cold, bleak, and inhospitable. Polar winds sweep over the land where no tree grows, and the soil is never tilled. Perfectly preserved mammoths have been discovered here, with the flesh, skin, and hair intact. The ground must have been frozen ever since the day of their entombment. Had it not been frozen, the bodies of the mammoths would have putrefied in a single summer, but they remained unspoiled for thousands of years. Could elephants, rhinoceroses, and giant mammoths have survived for eons off the scant food available in this climate, grazing on lichens that grow in the frozen tundra? Mammoth tusks have also been dredged from the bottom of the Arctic Ocean. And after strong windstorms, the shores of the islands are strewn with tusks that are cast up by the billows of waves and wind. The ocean off the coast of the Arctic islands was once dry land and home to massive herbivores. In northern Siberia, in the stomachs and between the teeth of the frozen mammoths are found plants and grasses that do not grow in the present day. Undigested food of leaves only found in southern Siberia are found in the stomachs. Microscopic examination of the skin showed red blood corpuscles, which was proof of not only a sudden death, but that death was due to suffocation either by gases or water. In the days when mammoths and rhinoceroses lived in northern Siberia, these now desolate wastelands were covered with great forests and bore a luxuriant array of vegetation. Thus, it is with the mystery of Siberia we find that the ancient descriptions of upheavals match the destruction and disappearance of these animals. A hurricane uprooted the trees of Siberia and flung them to the extreme north. Mountainous waves of the ocean piled them in huge hills, and some agent of bituminous nature transformed the once forests into charcoal. These petrified forests were swept from northern Siberia into the ocean, and together with the bones of animals and drifted sand, formed sediments of muck and debris, encasing the animals and once forests into splintered masses. The gases from volcanic eruptions and heated dust falling from the atmosphere suffocated the animals, who were then, in a matter of hours, as the crust dragged northward, frozen and entombed to this day. All around the world we find caves and fissures that are home to hundreds of now extinct animals, their bones splintered in a mass grave covered by sediment. The animals, in flight, were tossed about by encroaching waters and winds, pummeled into rock fissures and caves. Moments before these catastrophes took place, the animals fled for their lives. Herds of them together, both hunter and prey, fled along mucky shorelines and in some places heated ground from volcanoes. The prints in the muck or heated rock were instantly entombed as the waters receded, leaving sediment upon the land. Thus, it is we find fossilized footprints of animals and fossilized bodies of aquatic life in no state of decay. They were entombed in a matter of minutes. Great forests, too, were not spared. As fires raged, burning down vegetation and trees, the hurricane-forced winds uprooted them and tossed them about into splintered piles. Leaves, fruits, animals, and forests were buried in sediment, and thus the great coal beds of today were formed. The organic life had no time to decay, to be exposed to the elements. It is relayed in the ancient folklore that the sky rained fire. This was due to the superheated hydrocarbons from the cometary tail that ignited when falling over areas where volcanoes were erupting en masse. Where the liquid did not land in oceans or rivers or lakes, it seeped into the ground and pooled into pockets. Today we dig this up in troves of oil. The Sahara Desert, the greatest stretch of sand on earth, was once an open grassland. Drawings on rock show herds of cattle, both alive and now extinct, once roamed this vast wasteland. Other rock drawings are of Egyptian origin, showing war chariots led by horses, in an area where these animals could not have survived even several days. The ancient cultures in this region talk of a lake that used to form in the now Sahara that was called Lake Triton. In a stupendous catastrophe, the lake emptied itself into the Atlantic, and the sand on its bottom, forming a desert, when tectonic movements sealed off the springs that fed the lake. The land of pastures and forests became a desert of sand. Hippopotami that live in water and elephants disappeared, with them also the hunter and the farmer. The discoveries of whale bones in the desert is no mystery under this theory. Around the mountain zones of the world, we find that old rock has been thrust upwards over the newer rock and then displaced, sometimes miles over the ridge. During the building of the Alps, gigantic slabs of rock, thousands of feet thick, hundreds of miles long and tens of miles wide, were thrust up and then over the newer rock below. We find caves that had human inhabitants at extreme high altitudes in the Alps and other mountain zones, along with dens of now extinct bears and other animals. Life did not climb the height of the Alps to live in caves, but those caves were thrust upwards to incredible heights during the mountain-building process of these catastrophes. The Himalayas, stretching upwards of 20,000 feet, have skeletons and marine fossils lodged into the rocks, along with the shells of mollusks. Are we to believe that the vestiges of these animals are shown today if they died on the rocks of the now Himalayas 200 million years ago? The cause of and the demise of the Ice Age is still a mystery for modern science. Many theories abound. Perhaps the Earth was further from the Sun at one point, though the cause of this is unexplained. The theory of the Ice Age is an interpretation, and one based on the notion that our past was boring and uneventful, geologically speaking, like we experience today. Every concept of the Ice Age has since been formulated under this paradigm of uniformity. We see ice-carved landscapes around the globe. We see erratic boulders, glacial moraines in places near the equator. It is thus assumed that the ice must have stretched down from the poles in the distant past. And because we find bones of hippopotami in England, elephants in Alaska, interglacial periods were introduced into the scheme. The world must have warmed, causing the ice to retreat. Animals then migrated northward. Geology then introduces multiple interglacial periods to account for the fossils and bones found in caves. Yet the theory of crust displacement, or the pole shift, requires none of this. The geographical upheavals that our ancestors experienced is sufficient to explain the archaeological and geological conundrums of today. The ice from the poles never drifted down the equator. The Ice Age never existed. The reason we see ice-carved landscapes along equatorial regions is because at one point in the distant past, those landmasses were in a polar region. During the cataclysms described in folklore, the land shifts, the crust is dragged. This is why we find that the current polar regions were once home to massive, lush forests. Under this unifying theory, there is no need to bring different explanations for each and every phenomenon observed. The great upheavals of our past, though relayed through myth, legend, folklore, and stories of gods in the sky, happened. It happened in the recent memory of mankind. The fact that we ignore this today is indicative of our collective, unconscious state of denial. The Earth has not always been a placid place to live, save for the odd volcanic eruption, earthquake, or other localized disasters. A cosmic upheaval took place in our past, and it was the single cause of so many of the mysteries we see today. It's time we embrace this paradigm and leave behind us the collapsing schemes of modern geology and archaeology, both of which are possessed by the ideology that our planet's past was as uneventful as it is today. We've been in a state of amnesia. It's time to awake.